So yeah, today we're going to be talking about how to build a social selling culture. Social selling really is a term that's probably been around almost 2 years now, so most people are familiar with it, but we're going to really talk about how do you take what's traditionally been a bottoms-up tactics in most organizations and turn that into a top-down strategy. So the topics that we're going to be talking about today are, first and foremost, I'm going to talk a little bit about sales technology adoption. And no, that big hair, big lapels, and big phone is not me back in 1988, but I'm going to share some experiences that really started back then to help pave the way for where we are now in social selling. And then we're actually going to describe the 3 specific steps to building that social selling culture. So let's get started. First, I'll start with the big picture, and then I'll tell you what's going to get covered, what's not going to get covered. If we look at the whole big topic of social business, and we really just drill it down into the social selling piece for our Inside Sales Summit here, then we're going to be talking about the part that has to do with customer facing. So I'm not going to be talking about using social sharing tools internally, things like Jive, Chatter, Yammer, those types of things that are used internally many times for sales departments, but they're used in other departments within a company as well. So really what we're talking about is external communication, selling to the customer, involving the audience, using tools like LinkedIn, Twitter, and all the other social applications are out there. And since we're really going to have a business-to-business focus on this talk, a lot of the concentration will be on LinkedIn, which is the biggest player in that field. So when I talk to people about LinkedIn, when I go talk to sales leaders about LinkedIn, I usually get one of 3 reactions, and I want to share these with you. Maybe you've seen these yourselves in your own organization, right? So the first reaction that I get from sometimes is people say, hey, isn't LinkedIn just for finding a job? Well, you know, when LinkedIn started 10 years ago, that's certainly the initial impression people had of it, and it certainly still is a major player in the recruiting space. However, as more and more professionals got onto it, now with 235 million business professionals on it, salespeople quickly realized that it is a great way to build relationships, prospects, showcase their expertise and everything. So it's really grown into a great sales tool. And so if we just look at a statistic from the Aberdeen Group, there's lots of stats out now on the success of social selling, but here's one of them that came out in December saying that teams that are practicing social selling techniques have a 31% higher team quota attainment. So that's a pretty significant result for people that maybe just thought it was for finding a job. Now the second reaction that I sometimes get from a sales leader is when the word LinkedIn comes out of my mouth, I can see the wheels turning in their head, and they think, oh, LinkedIn, that's social media, and then they say, talk to marketing. Now, marketing is certainly going to be involved in social selling because content is a big part of social selling and marketing is a big part of content. But we're really talking about a sales training technique here, and so it's really more appropriate, again, that this is focused towards the sales team, the sales leader, and that's also why it's appropriate for this summit. So in fact, if you just look at the average B2B sales hunter, salesperson, right, it's many people are surprised to learn that in this statistics, they are still responsible for generating 70% of their own leads, right, even in this age of all the fancy, sophisticated marketing automation. In fact, I find that it's actually pretty telling. If you look at some of the leading companies in the marketing automation space, we look at Eloqua, which is now part of Oracle, and companies like Marketo, and others, those companies are actually some of the biggest proponents of social selling by the actual salespeople themselves. So I guess there's no more testament than companies that are all about driving leads through marketing, and they still have their salespeople practicing social selling. The third reaction, and this is the last one, the third reaction is many times the reason that a sales leader is a leader is because they're at the forefront and they're quick to adopt new technologies and take things into account. Obviously, that's why they're sales leaders. So a lot of times I hear them say, hey, my salespeople know how to use LinkedIn. And, of course, everybody's on LinkedIn. It's public and easy to find. So a lot of times I'll just jump on and take a look at their salespeople that are on LinkedIn, and I can quickly see in these kind of scenarios that they may have regional sales managers, sales executives, territory managers, right, that have 96, 73, 32, or 23 connections there. And you can pretty much guarantee that somebody that's got 23 connections on LinkedIn is really not getting a steady stream of business out of it. So when we start talking about the stages of sales technology adoption in general, a lot of times it plays out like this, right? Salespeople are very resourceful, so they're quick to just go out and grab something and start doing it for themselves if they think that's going to yield a bigger commission. So a lot of times salespeople will start out with this grassroots effort. Then once things get going, you maybe see some salespeople have some success and there's some precedent that gets set, then the company will start to look at it and say, hey, you know what, maybe we're going to actually have a strategy around it and formalize that so that we can bring everybody's skill level up and adopt some best practices. Then finally, if that matures long enough, companies are finally going to put actual systems in place and some metrics and things like that they can measure, and that way they can manage it much better. So this is kind of a general format that's used. So if we go back into history a little bit and we apply that to something that preceded social, let's take a look at where CRM came along. CRM may have started, let's say, in the 70s, and everybody had their Rolodex, and then the 80s came along, and people started to use things like ACT because they actually had personal computers that they could use then. And then the 90s came along, and you got into networked CRM systems, might be something like Goldmine, and, of course, the Sales Logics, and there's many others. And then you get into the 2000s, and you get into SaaS-based systems, CRM, and or rather Salesforce.com, and of course there's plenty of other those. So that's kind of what happened in the CRM side of it. If you look at what's happening now in the social selling side of it, most of the activity, well over 90% of companies are still in this very first stage. That's where we talk about these grassroots efforts by individual salespeople, which is ad hoc, it's uncontrolled, there's no consistency of messaging, and it's very hard to manage that way. So we are going to help companies on how can they get more strategic with it. Now, the first thing we look at is what's the degree of difficulty in putting this up. And I want to give you a compare and contrast, again, between the social selling initiatives and CRM. If we look at this scale from the easy side all the way to something as hard as rocket science, CRM's kind of up there closer to the rocket science part, not only because of the habits that have to get built and the new processes, but you got a lot of technology integration in the CRM. A lot of times when sales leaders look at social selling, they think that it's going to be just easy. Why? Because, everybody's got a LinkedIn account. It's just this free thing. They've had it for 4 or 5 years, and people have dabbled in it, and nothing's happened before. So I think it's going to be real easy. But in fact, if you actually want to turn it into a strategic advantage for your company, be able to cooperate and leverage the content that marketing's doing and really turn it into a competitive advantage, then it's going to be a little bit more complicated. Not as much as CRM, but probably more than most people think. So we've got 3 steps that are going to go into this, and these are really starting out at this level going to be very generic across any kind of a sales initiative, really almost any kind of a change initiative. First, we're going to set the goals for the program, then we're going to come and train people to reach those goals, and then finally we're going to manage it by checking to see how people are doing and making adjustments if we need to, and we want to reinforce it. So those are the 3 elements. So let's go into those in a little detail. Now, you know what? I have to tell you, I actually lied. There's actually kind of 4 steps here because before we actually get into the 3 action steps, we are going to define the players that are involved in a typical corporate social selling initiative. Now, I'm going to break these down into real finite responsibilities, so this would apply to a larger organization. If you're in a smaller organization, then some of these roles would just roll up into maybe 3 different people or actually one person sitting in a chair. But the very first thing is we want to start with the sales leader, typically the VP of sales. We've got the goals and the executive support. And you'll notice in here that I've used some photographs from archetypal movie or television characters that have kind of sort of played these roles that define the type of people we're talking about. So the next one we're going to talk about is the VP of marketing. VP of marketing, of course, we want on board because content and content sharing is such a big part of social selling, and it's actually the marketing department that is staffed, trained, and in some cases authorized to create content on behalf of the company. Most corporate pure corporate salespeople don't really have that skill or experience, and so a lot of times they want to leverage the information that's going to be created in marketing. Always in a project like this, just like in a CRM, you want to get an enthusiastic top rep, somebody that's really already drinking the Kool-Aid, probably has done a pretty good job of figuring out LinkedIn and blazing the trail, but they're also well respected among their peers and typically a leader on the sales board too. So that's a great person to have on the team. And then there's the all-important sales manager that needs to be on board in order to reinforce the information, to kind of change that culture and build those good habits through the information that they might be having in their regular account reviews. Since we are going to be able to measure and track things, we want to have somebody in the sales operations group that's going to help both with the measurement as well as the communication to people on a constant basis so that we can keep this momentum going. So those are the players. Let's get to step number one then, the goals. So again, if we want to take the easy way out, we could say the goals of any sales program is increase sales, and of course it should always be. But there's a lot of factors that go into increased sales, and social selling isn't necessarily going to impact that. And depending on how long your sales cycle is, you may want to measure some shorter-term progress in between actual goals. So let's look at some other things we can track. Probably one of the most important, I think, very solid line direct consequence results of social selling, because things like LinkedIn are so great at getting appointments, identifying and connecting with decision makers. Most of my clients really are focused on tracking, measuring, looking at appointments as one of the goals. And again, appointments could be face-to-face for a field person or a phone call or webinar for an inside person. Then there's another class of goals that sometimes people look at, the social influence indices, things like peer index, cred, and clout. A lot of times these are a little bit more popular in the marketing world, and they tend to be kind of more of a branding and influencing type of measure. So I'm not really that keen on tying sales training and social selling goals to these, to be honest. I think it's skewed a little bit in that direction, but they are there. Again, if a company is really more brand influenced. And then the final things are some specific metrics within the particular application that you can use, again, to measure progress, that everything is going in the right direction. And in the case of LinkedIn, that could be things like connections, or how many introductions, are people posting information, are they doing searches, viewing profiles, all those kinds of metrics which are in the application themselves. Now here's one example of what a client did, just so that you have something tangible to think about in terms of goals. So again, we talked about maybe the number of connections that you would have in LinkedIn is a good way to measure that your professional network is growing and you're building out relationships. One of the clients I worked with was in the insurance business, and one of the specifics that they wanted to do was not just measure the raw number of connections grown, but they wanted to look at referral sources, and in their case, referral sources are what they call the ABCs, attorneys, bankers, and CPAs. And because LinkedIn identifies the industry that people are connected to, that was a very easy metric to measure and to see how the insurance producers were doing growing their network among referral partners. So, part number 2 is the training. What's going to go on in terms of the actual training? So when we look at training, sometimes I liken that to having a gym club membership card in your wallet, right? That's what a LinkedIn account is, in the sense that, like, a lot of people have a LinkedIn account, right? But just having one doesn't really get you the results. You have to know how the stuff works, and then you have to use it. So if we use that analogy of the health club membership, again, just knowing how the equipment works, that's many times the easy part of it. The hardest part of it is actually the discipline to do those things on a regular basis, and that's what's going to drive the results. And so when we look at the training for a social selling, because we're implementing change, changing behavior, driving user adoption of new skills, we want to apply all those same lessons learned in rolling out CRM systems that we're going to use to improve our social selling skills. So this is the 4 components, the 4 topics, the 4 steps that are involved in a typical social selling initiative. We want to make sure people have a professional profile, they know how to grow out their network, that they know how to prospect with the tool, and that they know how to engage. And we talk about engaging, we're talking about listening for trigger events and posting content to attract buyers into you. So one of the points I always make is it does take time to do this. You cannot teach a sales force how to do everything about social selling in a 3 or even 3 hour or even a full day webinar. It just can't happen. One, there's a lot of information to take into account, but the other reasons are that they have to learn these new skills, right? And they have to read the room, meaning that they have to be reading in discussion groups and seeing what people are posting and commenting, kind of absorbing that. And they want to do that to really get the etiquette, what's the protocol, what's appropriate, and all those types of things before they start engaging with this particular community. And also, the network itself, right, the people that are in that network need to respond. So it's not just a matter of acquiring the information in their brain, but somebody else has to reply to it. And given that all the customers and referral partners and things like that aren't just sitting there on the edge of the seats waiting to comment and get involved in discussion and join and things like that, again, it takes a little bit of time. So the representation from the clip art here is really pretty accurate when people say, how long does it take? It's usually a 60 to 90-day program to where you want to really see some smooth sailing in terms of habits being in place and being able to see the results of those. Now, I want to tell you guys about 4 different training options that I see companies adopt when they're thinking about doing a social selling initiative for the sales team. So the first one that sometimes comes up is they say, hey, let's just get one of the marketing interns to come down and do it. You know, they're all media whiz, they're a digital native, they're 27 and a half years old, so they, grew up with fast thumbs to the smartphone, and, they have 1 million followers on Facebook. So there's some good and bad about all four of these options, and you just heard a lot of the good about the marketing intern. The bad about the marketing intern is that they just don't really typically they don't have sales experience, right? They haven't carried a bag. They don't know about all the non-technical aspects of selling and rapport building and qualifying and protocols and things like that. Don't have the life experience or the sales experience, and so they can't put the information in context, and one of the drawbacks to that is they can lose credibility with a seasoned, skeptical sales team. Now, somebody that has credibility with the sales team, obviously, is that top rep who is already socially savvy. That's one of the advocates that we wanted on the pilot sales team anyway. And this person is going to have a lot of credibility. They know how it works, and they can obviously plug it exactly in and make it relevant because they're using it in that real role. So what's the downside? Well, the downside is if it's a top rep, right, it could take them 2 to 3 months to actually create a program, develop the presentations, the workbooks, the exercises, the accountability tracking, all those types of things that's going to go into making a rigorous training program. And so the question is, do you want to take a top rep out of the field for 2 or 3 months just to put together a social selling program? Now, option number 3 is you can look at a traditional sales training company. Many of these companies have been around since I started selling 30 years ago, and you know what? A lot of their content hasn't necessarily changed that much in the last 30 years either. So if you're going to evaluate that sort of an option, you really just have to look at how well-versed they are in the current methodologies, the new methodologies of social selling, because a lot of times it's just difficult to kind of change your religion if you're drinking the Kool-Aid and pretty steeped in something you've been doing for 30 years. And then the last one, this is my subliminal advertising, or I guess not so subliminal advertising, but you can certainly look for certified social selling specialists. And if you even want to get more specific than that, the LinkedIn Sales Solution Group, which provides the specific sales navigator solution to corporate sales teams, has recently launched an official channel partner program. There's about 8-9 different companies around the world that are in that, and Sales Foundry is one of those companies. So if you want kind of the real stamp of approval, you can look for the certified LinkedIn sales channel partner. All right, so those are the different options. Now, then the question comes up, okay, well, what is marketing's role in here? Well, here's where the marketing intern can really help, because the marketing intern is going to really help on the content generation piece of it. Once you get the sales team that's starting to build up their network and they now need to be fed some content, that's what marketing's great at. So a lot of my clients, they'll send out there's different ways to do it, but one option is to just send out a weekly email, and here's some short clips that can be put in LinkedIn updates or shared in groups or tweeted and things like that, so they can provide the library that salespeople can use. And then, depending on if it's something that's linking back to a page, they can actually track that closed loop, and they can see the responses, and they can actually measure that ROI by distributing content through the Salesforce. All right? The next piece of this then is to say, well, that all sounds great, but how are we going to pay for this social selling training? Well, these are some different ways that clients have paid for social selling when it wasn't necessarily in the budget. In some instances, they may take it from other budgets where maybe a big sales initiative was going to be much longer and they needed a shorter payoff so they could show some improvement in this quarter. I've had different companies that might have more independent relationships with reps, and they simply let the reps pay for it, and in some cases they'll reimburse them if they pass the test at the end. Other companies have gone in and gotten career development funds actually out of HR, and if you're in California, the state of California actually pays for certain types of funding, and I've had companies that have paid me to do LinkedIn sales training, and they got reimbursed by the state government. Can you believe that? If you're a reseller of a company, reseller of products, like I've worked with a large Cisco reseller, in those cases there are maybe co-op funds available. Or if you're a small organization but you're a member of a trade association or some kind of a franchisees organization, you may be able to roll up everybody else and negotiate favorable discounts based on quantity. All right, that's training. The last piece of this is how do you manage a social selling initiative after you've done the training? So we'll talk about a couple components. Remember, we talked about the importance of the sales manager in this. And the easiest thing is to just start to dial it into your regular sales operation when you have account reviews with salespeople. And you might ask them questions like, how many appointments have you gotten through LinkedIn? Does anybody here have high-level, level 1 connections, right? Have you been introduced to the decision maker? These are all things that you can use the social selling tools to do, and that the manager can start to ask his salespeople about. Now, I'm going to show you one specific metric that I measure both in the audit that I do for companies, but at the same time, it's something that can give you an idea of what are metrics that can have a lot of impact on LinkedIn. So to do that, I'm just going to remind you of the terminology that LinkedIn uses in terms of your network. So if you look at your network here, with the person being up at the top left, right, the person you're directly connected to are your level 1s, and then one level out from that would be level 2, and 2 level out is going to be level 3. So in the case of the example that we're showing here, this person has 535 people in their level 1 connections, and that then results in 318,000 in their level 2 and over 10 million in level 3. Now, kind of keep those numbers in mind because we're going to jump to another chart. This is a fasten your seatbelt because there's a lot of data here. But we're going to jump to another chart that shows the number of level 1 connections on LinkedIn for a sales team of about 35 people. Okay? Now, I'll give you a second here to absorb it because there's a lot of information kind of in charts. So you're actually looking at 2 rows of data. The row in the front, which is mostly red, is the number of LinkedIn connections that these 35 salespeople had before a formal sales training program was initiated. And then the row in the back, which is mostly the green spikes there, is showing the number of connections that the folks had 60 days after a social selling program put together. And if you look way over to the right-hand side, you'll see 2 bars there, the short red one, tall yellow one. So the short red one was their average of 235 connections before training and their average after training of 407 connections. Okay, and you can see the ones in the red just means that they were below the company's desired goal of 400 connections per salesperson, and if they're in the dark green, they're above the company's goal of 400 connections per salesperson. So again, victory, success achieved by they hit their average number here, but there's one more piece of this slide which answers the question, so what? Okay, here's the so what on that slide. Just for this sales team of only 35 salespeople, the addition 60 days after training of growing that network rose the collective number of level ones by almost 6,000 people, 5,994 level one connections, which translates to approximately 1 million level 2 connections and over 10 million level 3 connections. So this company significantly grew its social footprint. So that means as this sales team learns how to socially share content, right, to showcase their expertise, to add valuable information to their network, to their audience, to their customers, to their prospects. They've significantly increased the impact of that effort just by growing their network. And so that is one way to measure it. We talked about measuring appointments as one of the real keys, a real early indicator of ultimately getting more sales. And that's as simple as just putting LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever sales, social selling application you're focused on, or all of them, just putting that in as a lead source in your CRM system. So the example here is showing somebody that's logging calls or logging appointments using Salesforce.com, and they're being able to flag then LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever it happens to be. Now, the last thing I'll touch on here when we talk about management is the LinkedIn Sales Navigator tool, which is the premium version of LinkedIn just for corporate sales teams. It does some really amazing things, not the least of which is it gives managers the ability to track metrics of their sales team rolled up in aggregate, much the same way you would do in a CRM dashboard for other typical sales metrics. So for companies that are really kind of graduated to a more sophisticated level, they're ready for that level 3 where they've actually done the formal training, they've got the skills in place, but now they want tools and dashboards and metrics to manage, then Sales Navigator is a perfect way to do it. So those are the 3 steps. Look at goals, trainings, and then manage to those goals to get your social selling culture moved up and productive. And I've got a couple things here just to wrap up that I want to offer you guys. If you want to see how your own team is doing, then as I've mentioned a couple times here, I do audit reports of sales teams and how they're doing. So if you have a sales team of at least 20 people and you would like an audit report done to see how they're doing, look at some key performance indicators and establish a baseline, then just send me an email, kurt@thesalesboundary.com, and I'll do that for you. And if you do not have a sales team of that size, or you're an individual, or it's just a smaller sales team, really for anybody, if you want to just get your own personal LinkedIn score, you can also go to my website. It's just a 10-question, 2-minute survey right there, and it'll return results, email the results to you. So you see where you score between 0 to 100, and it'll point out the areas where you're strong and ones where you may want to put a little more effort into shoring up your LinkedIn skills. So, hey, Jeremy, with that, I am done. It looks like we got just a few seconds left, so I think we should be just fine on the timing, and I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you.